There are moments in life when it feels like God is completely silent. You pray, but there's no answer. You cry out for direction, but the path ahead remains unclear. You ask for a sign, for a breakthrough, for something, anything, to show you that God is listening, that He cares, and yet nothing. The silence can be deafening. It can feel like God has forgotten you, like He has turned away. But that feeling, as real as it may seem, is not the truth. God's silence is never His absence. In fact, He is working behind the scenes in ways that you cannot yet see. Think about Joseph in the Bible. Here was a young man who had dreams of greatness, who saw visions of a future where he would rise above. But what happened? He was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Year after year, Joseph sat in a foreign land, far from home, far from his family, and seemingly far from the promises God had given him. Can you imagine the silence he must have felt? The moments when he must have wondered if God had abandoned him? But God was not absent. He was working in the background, moving people, aligning circumstances, and preparing Joseph for the exact moment when everything would change. The years of silence were not wasted years. They were years of preparation. When God is silent, it is often because He is doing something greater than what we can perceive. The human heart craves immediate answers, instant direction, and clear signs. But God doesn't operate on our timeline. His ways are higher, His plans are deeper, and His vision extends far beyond what we can comprehend. Sometimes He allows the silence because He is testing our faith. Will we still trust Him even when we don't hear His voice? Will we continue to walk forward even when we don't see the road? Faith is not about having all the answers, it's about believing even when we don't. Look at the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. After being delivered from Egypt, they found themselves wandering for years, uncertain of when they would finally reach the promised land. There were days when they must have wondered if God had abandoned them. But during that time, God was leading them, feeding them, sustaining them. Even in the silence, He was present. Even when they didn't understand, He was making a way. And when the time was right, the walls of Jericho fell, the land was given to them, and they saw that God had been faithful all along. In your own life, you may be facing a situation where you don't see a way forward. You've prayed, but nothing has changed. You've waited, but the breakthrough hasn't come. It can feel frustrating, discouraging, even hopeless. But just because God isn't speaking in the way you expect doesn't mean He isn't moving. The pieces are shifting, the plan is unfolding, and one day you will look back and see that every silent moment had a purpose. Every delay, every unanswered prayer, every closed door was leading you exactly where you needed to be. God's silence can feel like a test, but it is also an invitation to trust Him more deeply, to walk by faith and not by sight, to believe that even when you can't hear Him, He is near. Silence is not emptiness, it is not rejection, it is not abandonment. It is often the space where God is working in ways we cannot yet understand. And in that space, something powerful is happening. Struggles are a part of life that no one can escape. They come in different forms: disappointments, failures, betrayals, unexpected losses. In those moments, it is easy to question why things are happening the way they are. It is easy to feel like everything is falling apart, like there is no purpose to the pain. But struggles are never just obstacles. They are shaping tools in the hands of God. Every challenge, every hardship, every difficult season is preparing you for something greater than you can currently see. When a storm comes, it does not mean the sun has disappeared. It only means that for a time, the clouds are blocking what is always there. In the same way, trials do not mean God has abandoned you. They are simply the conditions through which He strengthens, refines, and equips you for what is coming. Just like fire purifies gold, struggles purify your character. They burn away the impurities of pride, doubt, fear, and impatience. They force you to dig deeper, to rely not on your own strength, but on the strength of God. Look at David. Before he became king, he spent years on the run, hiding in caves, facing betrayals, dealing with fear. He was anointed, yet he was hunted. He had a promise, yet he was constantly under attack. But those years of struggle were not wasted years. They were the years that made him a leader, that taught him courage, that deepened his reliance on God. Without those struggles, he would not have been ready to step into his calling. The hardship was not a sign that God had forgotten him. It was the preparation for what was ahead. Sometimes the things that seem to be breaking you are actually the things that are building you. The rejection that crushed your spirit was actually redirecting you to something better. The loss that left you shattered was making room for something greater. The waiting season that felt endless was developing patience, endurance, and faith that you would not have gained any other way. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something far beyond what you imagined. Imagine a seed buried in the soil. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. It is covered in darkness, hidden beneath the surface. But underground, something powerful is taking place. The seed is breaking, roots are forming, and in time, a sprout will push through the soil. The struggle of breaking apart, of pushing through the dirt, is necessary for the plant to grow. Without that struggle, there is no strength, no stability, no fruit. In the same way, your struggles are not pointless. They are the soil in which God is growing something within you. Think about the moments when you have grown the most in life. They were not the easy moments. They were the moments when you had to fight through something, when you had to face challenges that seemed impossible, when you had to trust in God because there was no other option. Growth is uncomfortable, change is painful, but nothing strong is ever built without struggle. A diamond is just a piece of coal until it has been under pressure. Steel is not strong until it has gone through fire. A tree's roots do not deepen unless it faces strong winds. The process is difficult, but the result is worth it. When you are facing struggles, it may feel like God is distant, but He is not. He sees every tear, every sleepless night, every silent prayer. He knows the weight you are carrying, but He also knows what is ahead. He knows what you are being prepared for, and He knows that the struggle you are facing now is shaping you for the path He has set before you. Faith is one of the hardest things to hold on to when life feels uncertain. The human heart craves clarity, direction, and proof before taking a step forward. But faith does not work that way. Faith is trusting the way before you can see it. It is believing that God is leading you even when the path ahead is unclear. It is moving forward even when you do not have all the answers. This is what separates those who live by sight from those who live by faith. Abraham was called by God to leave his home, his family, and everything familiar to go to a land that God would show him. God did not give him a map. He did not reveal the entire plan in advance. He simply said, "Go," and Abraham went. That is faith, trusting in God's promise before seeing the destination. If Abraham had waited for certainty, he would have never left. If he had waited to understand every detail, he would have never stepped into his destiny. But because he moved in faith, he became the father of many nations. Many times, people wait for a sign before they take action. They wait for everything to make sense before trusting God. But faith does not work that way. Faith is stepping out when nothing makes sense, when you have more questions than answers, when you do not see the full picture but believe that God does. It is walking through the fog, knowing that God is guiding every step. The truth is, if you could see everything clearly, you would not need faith. If you had every answer before you began, you would not have to trust God. But God calls His people to walk by faith, not by sight, because He knows that faith strengthens, deepens, and prepares the heart in a way that certainty never could. Peter experienced this firsthand when Jesus called him to walk on water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he walked on the impossible. The moment he focused on the wind and the waves, he began to sink. That is what happens when people lose faith. They allow the circumstances around them to dictate what they believe rather than keeping their eyes fixed on God. The wind and the waves of life will always be there. Challenges, doubts, fears, and setbacks. But faith says, I will keep walking no matter what it looks like. Faith is also about trust in God's timing. There are moments when it feels like nothing is happening, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain closed. In those times, it is easy to question if God is even listening, but just because you do not see movement does not mean God is not working. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For weeks it looks like nothing is happening, but beneath the soil, roots are forming, growth is taking place where no one can see it, and then at the right time, the sprout breaks through. Faith requires trusting that God is working even when you do not see immediate results. There will be moments when faith feels like walking in the dark. There will be moments when you want to turn back because the unknown is too frightening. But every person who has ever done something great for God had to step forward without seeing the whole picture. Noah built the ark before he ever saw rain. Moses stretched his staff before the sea parted. The walls of Jericho fell after the people marched in obedience. The breakthrough does not come before faith, it comes because of it. Faith is not about understanding everything. It is about trusting that God already does. It is choosing to believe that He is making a way even when the way is not visible. It is taking the first step, knowing that God will provide the next. There are times in life when doors close unexpectedly. Opportunities that once seemed certain suddenly disappear. Relationships that felt unshakable fall apart. Paths that once appeared clear become blocked. In those moments, it is easy to feel discouraged, confused, or even abandoned. But what may seem like rejection is often divine redirect. When God closes a door, it is never to harm you, it is to lead you to the right one. Human nature resists closed doors because they feel like failure. People want things to work out according to their plans, their timing, and their expectations. When something does not go the way they hoped, the natural reaction is to question why. But God sees beyond what the human eye can perceive. He knows what is on the other side of every decision, every relationship, and every opportunity. A door that remains open may lead to disaster. A path that seems right in the moment may cause unnecessary pain in the future. God, in His wisdom, sometimes closes doors to protect, redirect, and prepare His people for something greater. Think about Joseph. He had a vision of leadership, yet every door seemed to close on him. He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and later in prison for something he did not do. Every step seemed like a setback, but in reality, each closed door was positioning him for the exact moment when he would step into his purpose. Had he never been betrayed, he would not have ended up in Egypt. Had he never been falsely accused, he would not have been placed in the very prison where he would meet the person who would later introduce him to Pharaoh. The doors that closed on Joseph were not rejections, they were stepping stones. When God closes a door, it is easy to become frustrated, to try and force it open, to question His plan. But forcing something that is not meant for you will only lead to heartache. People often waste time chasing after things that God has already removed. They knock on doors that were shut for a reason, hoping they will reopen. They hold on to relationships that God has already ended. They keep revisiting past opportunities instead of trusting that something better is ahead. But when God closes a door, He does it with purpose. Moses understood this when leading the Israelites out of Egypt. When they reached the Red Sea, it seemed like an impossible situation. Behind them, Pharaoh's army was approaching. In front of them, the sea blocked their path. It looked like a dead end, like every option had been taken away. But what seemed like a closed door was actually a setup for one of the greatest miracles in history. God was making a way where there was no way. When He closes one path, it is because He is about to open another, one that no man can shut. There are moments in life when something ends, and it feels like a loss. But often what looks like an ending is actually a new beginning. A job that was lost may lead to an opportunity that is far better than what was left behind. A relationship that ended may have been preventing something healthier from coming in. A dream that did not work out may have been too small compared to what God had in store. The human mind sees only what is immediately in front of it, but God sees the entire picture. Trusting God means accepting closed doors with the same faith as open ones. It means believing that His plans are higher, His ways are better, and His timing is perfect. It means surrendering control and understanding that just because you do not see the full picture does not mean there is not one. every closed door is a sign that God is still leading, still working, still making a way. Surrender is one of the hardest things for a person to do. The natural instinct is to take control, to plan every detail, to hold on tightly to what feels safe and familiar. But when it comes to walking with God, surrender is not a sign of weakness. It is the path to true clarity and peace. Letting go of personal plans, expectations, and desires does not mean giving up. It means trusting that God's plan is better, even when it is not fully understood. The struggle to surrender comes from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of things not working out the way they were envisioned. People try to hold on to situations that are slipping through their fingers. They resist change because they do not know what is on the other side. But the truth is, holding on to something that is not meant to stay will only cause more pain. Surrender is not about losing. It is about making room for something greater. Abraham faced this when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac. Isaac was the fulfillment of God's promise, the child Abraham had waited years for. Yet God asked Abraham to lay him on the altar. It made no sense. It went against everything Abraham wanted. But in that moment, Abraham had to decide, would he trust his own understanding or would he trust God? He chose to surrender. And because he did, he not only received Isaac back, but he also saw the miraculous provision of God. When God calls for surrender, it is never to take something away without purpose. It is to bring something better. Many people live in a constant state of anxiety because they are trying to control everything. They worry about the future, about outcomes, about what might or might not happen. But peace is not found in having all the answers. It is found in trusting the one who does. Surrendering to God means releasing the need to figure everything out and resting in the assurance that He already has. It means believing that even when things do not make sense, He is working all things together for good. Peter experienced this on the night Jesus was arrested. When the soldiers came, Peter drew his sword, ready to fight. He wanted to take control, to fix the situation himself. But Jesus told him to put the sword away. Jesus knew that surrendering to God's plan was the only way forward. If Peter had his way, he would have prevented the very thing that led to salvation. That is what happens when people refuse to surrender. They end up fighting battles that were never theirs to fight. They end up resisting the very thing that will lead them into their purpose. Sometimes, surrender means letting go of something that was once good but is no longer part of God's plan. A relationship that is no longer serving His purpose. A job that was once fulfilling but now feels empty. A dream that was once the goal but is now a distraction. Surrender does not mean failure. It means recognizing when it is time to step aside and trust that God is leading to something better. There is freedom in surrender. The burden of control is heavy. Trying to manipulate circumstances, predict outcomes, life often presents moments of confusion, frustration, and uncertainty. There are seasons when nothing seems to be moving forward, when prayers feel unanswered, and when waiting seems unbearable. In those times, it is easy to doubt, to wonder if things will ever change, to question whether God is truly working. But God's timing is never early, never late. It is always perfect. What may feel like a delay is actually divine preparation. What seems like a setback is often a setup for something far greater than what can be seen in the present moment. Human nature desires control. People want things to happen on their schedule according to their plans. When something takes longer than expected, the tendency is to grow impatient, to push forward in their own strength, or to become discouraged. But God does not operate on human timelines. He sees the beginning and the end, the past and the future, and every detail in between. What seems like waiting is actually part of the process. When God is orchestrating something, every detail must align at the right moment. Rushing the process only leads to unnecessary struggle. Abraham and Sarah experienced this firsthand. God promised them a son, but the years passed and nothing happened. They waited and waited, but the promise seemed delayed. In their impatience, they took matters into their own hands, and the consequences of that decision brought unnecessary hardship. But when the time was right, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. Had they trusted God's timing from the beginning, they would have avoided years of struggle. God's promise was never in question. The timing was simply different from what they expected. There is a reason certain prayers do not receive immediate answers. Sometimes the delay is about preparation. There are lessons to be learned, character to be refined, and faith to be strengthened before stepping into the next season. If doors open too soon, the opportunity might not be sustainable. If blessings came prematurely, they might be mishandled. Just as a child is not given the keys to a car before learning how to drive, God does not release things before the heart is ready to receive them. Joseph had dreams of leadership, yet he spent years in slavery and prison before stepping into his purpose. From the outside, it looked like delay, like wasted time. But every moment was preparation. In the pit, he learned resilience. In slavery, he learned responsibility. In prison, he learned patience. Had he gone straight from his father's house to the palace, he would not have been ready. God's timing ensured that when the moment arrived, Joseph was fully equipped to step into his destiny. There is also protection in God's timing. There are things unseen, obstacles, dangers, situations that could bring harm. Sometimes what feels like a delay is actually a shield from something that could cause unnecessary pain. A relationship that does not work out, a job that does not come through, an opportunity that falls apart. These moments can feel frustrating, but they are often a form of protection. Only in hindsight do people realize that what they wanted so desperately would not have been right for them. Trusting God's timing requires surrender. It requires letting go of control, releasing anxiety, and believing that He knows what is best. It is choosing to wait with faith rather than frustration, with peace rather than panic. There is a purpose in the waiting. There is something happening behind the scenes that cannot yet be seen. The delay is not denial. The silence is not absence. Every moment is being perfectly orchestrated, every detail aligned, every step prepared. When the time is right, what is meant to be will unfold in a way that is far greater than anything that could have been forced or rushed.